one of the most senior sinologists in our midst. Most people look at me as the
senior means distinguished.
No,
not necessarily advanced.
As ancient monument, because I got my PhD from Stanford in the summer of 1975, although I was still in infancy, I was only 25. But the real senior person is Professor Lin White, who got his PhD in 1972 from across the bay in the August UC Berkeley, where he would also chair one of the afternoon panels tomorrow. And his credential was so full that I won't read his biography, except that he had just published a book last year on Hong Kong, and not just Hong Kong, but in the larger context of democracy and many things. And for those of you who didn't have time to read it, I had a review article of his book and also Richard Bush's book on Hong Kong democracy forthcoming in the Journal of East Asian Studies. But Lin White, of course, is more than qualified because he spent more time in Hong Kong during the summer. I never spent time in Hong Kong, even when I was teaching at Hong Kong. I hate the summer typhoon, but he came to Hong Kong to do research with his wife. So he earned the right to be a semi-Hong Konger, to speak up. Then the second panelist is my colleague, Mr. Universal Democracy, Larry Diamond, who had, of all his distinction, produced a famous person. Virginia Year's MA thesis was under him, and thank God she almost ended up being the Hong Kong chief executive, and you would be responsible for all her accomplishments and shortcomings. Thank God she didn't make it, and thank God you could sleep well. Okay.
Thank you, Ming. I am honored to be here, and I am glad that Confucius has brainwashed everybody to think that being old is a virtue. It isn't. I want to offer my deep thanks to the Ming Emperor. I would know if my old bones would still allow that, but I am honored to be here. And I should say it is just weird for me to be trying to tell Martin Lee or Jasper TSANG about Hong Kong politics. I mean, these are the people who've made Hong Kong politics for the last many decades. And I must say I respect them both for their democratic and their patriotic characteristics. Different, and interestingly different though they are. A Guailo can only contribute with comparative politics and distant observations. Interdisciplinary is in the title of this conference, and that gives me perhaps a little bit of legitimacy. Ming told me just at lunch that I don't have much time, but I didn't press him on how much, and I prepared a lot, and I'll simply skip over some of the pages here. My first point should be that no country is anything like a complete democracy, or, for that matter, a fully unified autocracy. Countries come in many sizes of polities, and how they relate to each other varies. There is no, quote, democracy, unquote, on the face of this earth in which churches, universities, schools, businesses are not hierarchical. They all are. And they affect what the state is. Second point, Hong Kong has always been Chinese. I know it was a British colony for a while, but the overwhelming population has always been Chinese, and it has been conservative. Hong Kong was largely populated by landowners fleeing violence and leftist rebellions on the mainland, all the way back to the Taipings and Small Swords, who also the 1920s, early 1920s nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, who looked scary to landlords at that time. Wars, of course, of the 30s and 40s, Mao's land seizures of the 40s and 50s, which landlords, fleeing China, conservatives, rich people from the mainland fleeing China to Hong Kong left. Then the famine after the Great Leap, which was another influx of influx of migration to Hong Kong. Of course, the Cultural Revolution. Conservatives populated Hong Kong, Chinese conservatives. These family memories are still strong. They don't endear Hong Kongers to communism. Mr. Jasper TSANG, I think, was once asked by a reporter whether he had secretly entered the Communist Party. He said some rather negative things this morning about the Communist Party, which were interesting, but I don't know whether the reporter said he didn't reply to that question, but simply said, very accurately, that communism is unpopular in Hong Kong. If he wants to ask the question about answer the question about the party later, he could. Family traditions. In families as polities, which they are, makes leftism anathema to many, especially to many elite, long-time Hong Kongers. I'm going to skip some things about LegCo and the hair quota and remainder system that I talked about this morning, but it really is important, and it's important for everybody to understand that's not a proportional representation system. It doesn't give the same results as a true PR system would. Anyway, elections to LegCo have created a party system that is quite vibrant, but it elects minoritarian representative candidates to bully pulpits and creates the, let me say, best legitimated but rather powerless debating society that I know of. Hong Kong is not, I think, a democracy, even a unique democracy, and I've already apologized to Sonny for saying that sort of thing. Will it ever become democratic or more democratic? Actually, no place is a democracy. But Hong Kong is really not as much democratic as one might expect it to be. Will it ever become more so? For reasons that I'm about to go into, yes, is the answer to that question. Eventually it will, but not for a long while, and not until on the mainland, the elite, that means now the Chinese Communist Party, becomes less fearful of its own differences, allowing legitimate public debate between its conservative and reformist members. To use the old metaphors, its lions and its foxes, all of whom clearly exist in Hong Kong. Li Chang talks about youth leaguers and princelings, and there are other groups on the mainland, but and they debate with each other, but not in public, not legitimately, because public debate about the issues that I'm talking about is not okay on the mainland. The party, Chinese Communist Party, is now mainly reactionary in the original sense. It is reacting after it lost most of socialism in the 1980s. Rural factories destroyed light industry socialism and caused inflation in the 1980s, ending very badly at Tiananmen, which many of us watched on Hong Kong TV. I happened to be there then. Since 1990, the party has been in restoration mode, trying to bring back the power that it lost from 1970 to 1990. And it has created a conservatism that now currently affects Hong Kong politics very deeply. Benny mentioned the Lion Rock spirit, and I think that is irrelevant now. My main analysis is this, and it is aimed at answering the question, what makes for democracy or any other regime type anywhere? I'm going to mention as representatives some comparative researchers who talk about 5 kinds of factors. Their names are Rustow, Lipset, Wash, Huntington, and Tarot, to try to answer that question. These comparativists tried to show what helps or hinders democratization empirically, or for that matter, the rise of authoritarian regimes empirically. None of the people I just mentioned, and they are just representative strains of thought in comparative politics, mention Hong Kong. This is all based on experiences in other countries. Well, what else should a Guilo do? Talk about comparative. First, Rustow shows that no regime type is established, except in revolutions, without current elite approval. That point governs all the others. A country's elite must tolerate any change or continuance of a regime type. For example, a change to democracy, a continuance of authoritarianism, or any other such change. So the question then becomes, what makes an elite make such approval? What affects the cost-benefit calculation of elites? In this case, both the Hong Kong elite and the Beijing elite, or the China elite, are relevant. What affects their calculations to make the chance of, for example, losing an election, allowing a vote that might overthrow it, or repressing protests when they occur? What affects those calculations? One major factor that affects such calculations is clearly correlated with general levels of modernity, to use an old word, high per capita income, education levels, modern social economy. This modernity makes societies diverse, not just old peasants and landlords, but large numbers of groups, lawyers and clerics and teachers and soldiers and other functional specialists who develop group interests that representative democracy with rule of law may organize effectively, has organized effectively in practically all rich societies of the world. If demands from such groups challenge an elite, it may recruit rather than repress new members, allowing more types of people to participate in politics, and perhaps allow serious elections. It is a fact that practically all of the world's rich states per capita are unapologetic liberal democracies. Not Singapore. A tiny group of 5 million Chinese in the middle of 270 million, more or less, Muslim Malays. That context is totally different from Hong Kong's, even though they are similar in some ways, Chinese cities. The context or surrounding Singapore is totally different. And of course it is totally different from China. Hong Kong is China's richest, most diverse city, certainly most diverse city. So by Lipsitz criterion, it would already be a democracy if it were sovereign, which of course it isn't. It is part of China. Some other parts of China, such as Shanghai, are similar in many ways. But net demands on elites have not yet moved the party elite to risk free expression of views. Eventually, I'm pretty sure, modernity in Hong Kong and other parts of China may inspire the national elite to incorporate the diversity of Hong Kong and other diversities in China. But that time hasn't come yet. They don't feel safe enough in their own elite to do that yet. That's the first point. The first type of factor, modernity, that tends to affect the choices of elites to change or maintain regime types. So the next point, another factor that affects elite decision, is fear of asset redistribution. That factor prevents democratization and supports continuance of authority, or even authoritarianism on the local sort. A tiny minority of local Hong Kong elites, commonly called tycoons, is very anti-democratic because it fears that giving votes to poor people will raise taxes. Indeed, they probably will raise taxes. Indeed, in my view, but I am not Chinese or Hong Kong, so I can't really make a suggestion. That's what Hong Kong needs, precisely, more taxes and more public money going into things. The tycoons, frankly, are greedy, relying on traditional Hong Kong anti-welfarism to get more wealth than they know they need. US dollar billionaires' assets as a portion of GDP in Hong Kong exceed 75%. The runner-up, according to the United Nations statistics, I think it's UN, on that scale is Russia with only 20%, 75% in Hong Kong, and number 2 in the world is Russia with 75%. Singapore is slightly below that. Hong Kong leads the world for inequality between super rich and others. Now the Heritage Foundation tells us that Hong Kong is the world's most free economy, Let me be plain, that is an egregious lie, at least insofar as it applies to local markets. It certainly isn't a lie as for competitiveness on international markets. But locally, oligopolies, duopolies, Park and Shop and Wilton, for example, or monopolies dominate local markets in groceries, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, docks, telecoms, electric power, and private housing. Staples and rents are expensive, and Hong Kong people are not pleased with that fact. Local tycoons reap profits that they know they don't need. Let me suggest this is politically a very unstable situation. And it is one of the reasons for the worrying trend, to use a point that Mr. Cheong CHING raised, a phrase he used to. Carlos Bosch, a comparativist, writes generally, not mentioning Hong Kong, about tax-fearing elites as blockers of democratization in many countries. The Communist Party, despite its proletarian pretensions, has franchised the Hong Kong government mostly to tycoons. And as I say, I think that is unstable. It does follow an old imperial style in China, useful for centuries in expanding China's domain. Tsinghua, at the center, seeks in each peripheral place a collaborator elite minority. David Foer, a Hong Kong historian, has written about the West River area in Guangxi, particularly, and he writes about Tusi, lords of the land, whom imperial Chinese regimes of the past brought into the system gradually. In Taiwan, interesting choice of minority proxy is the Kuomintang, non-Taiwanese, so potentially more pliable certainly than the Minjindang, but now losing elections, or perhaps continuing to, one doesn't know yet. In Tibet, in the 1950s, the choice was very interesting. Gelugpa monks, headed by the Dalai Lama, were the chosen proxy. Then the Dalai Lama got fed up and left in 1959. Now other Tibetans in Xinjiang similarly approved Uyghur. In Hong Kong, a very different kind of minority, the richest of the tycoons, the chosen proxy minority for the center, the Tsinghua, in this part of the periphery. That strategy of Beijing's may well reach a limit, I think. And what will replace it? Mr. Zhang's party, the DAP. And is already, I think, beginning to replace that as a more resilient proxy than the tycoons were. Also less minoritarian. Will fear of taxes prevent Hong Kong democracy forever? No. But it has done that for a long time under both the British and the communists. Now, more tycoons begin to abscond from Hong Kong. This reduces their interest in preventing popular sovereignty. Also now, a poor versus rich cleavage cuts across the patriotic versus democratic division. So does a young versus old cleavage. These topics have already come up. As families resent that youths lack the career opportunities their parents had. Carrie Lam avers to fix this, and I wish her luck by appointing a few youths to advisory panels, but the need, frankly, is for LegCo to change its constituency, provide more money and more education for better jobs, also to provide better housing, which is dilapidated quite extensively since the tycoons moved so many blue-collar jobs to the inland to China further. This costs public money. The tycoons can veto that with the functional constituency system. Beijing will want a new main proxy because the tycoons will not suffice, I think, much longer. Other people who know more about Hong Kong may do that, may speak to that. Next, another factor, separate from modernity or tax avoidance, are international fads. Samuel Huntington is a comparativist who writes about that. Fads have shaped elites' decisions to allow or prevent democracy, for example. Global norms for democracy or authoritarianism have dominated different times. In the 20s and 30s, saw a tide of tyrannies. Mussolini and Hitler, obviously, while the 80s and 90s showed more democracies in the world. that tide has temporarily, is now anyway, ebbed, I think, temporarily. From Thailand to Turkey, from Hungary to China, we see less enthusiasm for real democracy. In Hong Kong, this international norms factor is particularly paradoxical because the still ruling tycoon elite is mainly Western educated, and this word West is a bad word among conservatives in Beijing. Next, education in political habits. I'm closer than